Hey everyone, welcome back to part 3 of our opening repertoire guide, looking at the move 1e4 against everything. And well, we've so far had a look at some very unusual and I guess you can say dubious options from white after e4, e5, knight f3, with things like the elephant gambit and the Latvian gambit. Today we're going to focus on something that's a little bit more, has a little bit better reputation, and is something that we need to be prepared against. And that is the ultra solid Philidor Defense with d6. So what's the purpose of this move? Well, firstly, I'd like to say there's a lot of logic to this particular move. Firstly, it just defends this pawn on e5. Seems pretty basic. That's the essential plan, is that we're just holding on to this pawn, but it also potentially allows this bishop on c8 to develop maybe onto g4, putting a pin, an early pin, on white's knight. Now the downside of this move is that black is hemming in his other bishop on f8, and quite often in most of the structures in the Philidor, the bishop will come to e7 and kind of fulfill a defensive role, as opposed to it coming outside on c5, where it could maybe do both defensive and also offensive strategies against f2. So this is because of this, the Philidor is kind of seen as this bit of a passive opening, which is why it doesn't enjoy as much play at the master level. But having said that, it's still a tricky customer to break down, and I will just say, just from my own personal experience, I've struggled against the Philidor in the past. I've lost some really bad tournament games against this particular line because I wasn't too sure how to take on this particular strong and solid defense. So here, what I would recommend if you're playing against this particular line is to start with the move d4. And what d4 essentially does is it's is immediately setting up a threat of taking here on e5, followed by a queen exchange, and have just a nice good position here. So there's a number of different moves that black can play in this position, and we're going to have a look at them, including the main line, in the course of this video. So the first variation that we're going to have a look at today is called the like variation. This is where you must make sure you leave a like on this video, comment below if you enjoy what you see, and share this video with a friend. So make sure you do that before you continue. Let's get on with the video. Okay, let's start with some of the dodgy moves first. So the first move I want to have a look at on move 3 for black is the move f5. This is known as the Philidor counter-gambit. It looks very similar to what we've looked at already with the Latvian gambit. The only difference here is where these pawns are positioned. So white has got a pawn on d4, black has got a pawn on d6. And you would think this would make this line a little bit more solid for black, but oh no, I think this is still a winning position for white. Here, white's best move is, and again it's very similar to what we've looked at in the Latvian gambit in a lot of lines, is to play the move bishop to c4. Simple threat, we're going to be jumping the knight into g4, threatening f7 to fork both the queen and the rook here. Now there's been a number of moves tried by black here, but just to show you some of the problems that black has in this position, if let's say he gets a bit greedy, takes on d4 for example, then against this we should just, instead of just jumping in here, because this would allow the knight to come to h6 and maybe hold this position, I think actually white's best moves are just to develop, get on with everything, because really black's setup is just a bit ridiculous here. He's not developed any of his pieces, he's only moved pawns, and he's got his king unsafe in the process. And well, there's been a load of disasters in this particular line. One funny one that I looked at was after f takes an e4. Here white can recover one of the lost pawns, but notice that black's setup is just It's just really, really bad. He's got nothing developed. If d5 is played, then this just runs into this. So you're going to recover your pawn and have a very, very good game. If g6, obviously this is just a disaster. So instead of this, black has also tried the move knight to f6, guarding that h5 square. Again, you've got some similar tactics, similar ideas to what we've looked at in the Latvian gambit already with this particular line, so you just got to kind of remember those similar things. Here white has maybe the best line, I think, is just developing his knights. After bishop to e7, again it's ridiculous for black because he can't actually castle, so what's the point in playing bishop to e7? Rook to e1, a very uncomfortable position now for white. Knight to c6 has been played here, and funnily enough there's some ridiculous computer lines that I found here after maybe knight takes on e4, giving up a knight, but white gets this very stunning, you wouldn't believe it, like bishop to h6. He can get away with all this stuff because again he's so far developed, but you know, rook takes here on e4 would be sufficient for a good advantage in this position. But I really like this move because if, let's say, g takes on h6, then this is mate in 2, very nice. And if anything else, if let's say they take the other knight, for example, then here sufficient for a win is just taking here, you're forking the bishop, forking the rook. The king's going to be off its square. It's going to look really, really bad in the next few moves for black. Despite the fact that he's up 5 points of material, he's going to lose it all back. And there's a reason why this is a computer advantage of +7. It's ridiculous that it is, but it is what it is because there's just so many stuff hanging in this position. So as you can see, there's already some disasters in this particular line, and it's all to do with the fact that black has not actually developed any pieces here. He's only pushed pawns, and in doing so he's just going to fall behind in development very, very quickly. Okay, so let's have a look at some other moves. Well, let's just say knight to f6 is played. That looks to be quite logical in that it guards this h5 square. The problem is it now allows the knight to come to g5. Notice that black has not played the move knight to h6, which would guard the f7 square. And unfortunately for black, there's no good way to deal with this threat. He could try d5 to block this knight from coming to f7, but here after a couple of exchanges, let's say something like this, white has a lot of pleasant options here, but I think the simplest is just taking here. You're now threatening to take this knight. Black has to make another stupid pawn move with h6, with c6, and now you can just develop again. Notice here that black can never take this knight, as you'll get this nasty fork winning some more material. So again, this line just leads to disaster for black. Okay, now we'll look at the main line from black's perspective. So f takes an e4 is the move that's been played the most, and the mistake that black has made is maybe jumping this knight to g5, which again, it kind of runs into a defensive idea from black. Here, white has a very powerful move. It's a nice little tactic, this one, and it kind of has similar ideas to that of what you might see in the Philidor Defense, where white maybe sacrifices a knight on e5. So the move here is, of course, knight takes on e5. And what this move does is, once again, it's threatening f7. Black should take, but of course in doing so, it runs into this check. This is really bad for black. If he moves his king somewhere, let's just say it goes to e7, this leads to checkmate in 2, so that's really, really bad. And if anything else, if let's say you go g6 here, then you just win this pawn. So I really can't see why the Philidor counter gambit has got any real reputation. I think white is just going to be totally winning in pretty much all the lines in this particular variation. So you should enjoy a very good game if they do decide to play that. Okay, so back to the start. Let's have a look at some other rubbish moves that black can play here. F6 has been played. Obviously, this looks a little bit like a Damiano defense. I think bishop c4 should give white a clear edge. He's just taking advantage of all the light squares that have been opened up by these pawn moves. And really, your strategy is just going to be revolving around how best to control these squares. If, let's say, something like this, for example, getting the bishop onto g4, then I think white should do fine here. He can maybe play something like h3, and if black is to foolishly give up this bishop, then you've got a very nice game with the queen and the bishop controlling all of the light squares, and black has not got really any pieces to deal with it. He might try something with his queen, but I think here you've got a very nice edge and a very comfortable looking position. Okay, so back to our main position here. Another move that's been tried by black is the move bishop to g4. And well, this move might look very familiar to a lot of you, and the reason why it looks so familiar is because this is actually following a master game, a very famous master game between Paul Morphy and two players in consultation. I can't quite remember their names now, but I'm just going to call them the Count and the Duke. And this is actually from a very famous opera house game. Now in that position, black actually took here on e5, and this had a clear threat of, if let's say the pawn were to recapture, white would pick up this queen. So in the game, what black actually did was he took here on f3, queen takes an f3, d takes an e5, so it dealt with those issues. And, well, white got a very nice edge with bishop to c4. Notice here that he is threatening checkmate in 1. So black dealt with that threat, but ran into this issue. And I guess what I would say, just in terms of this particular line, if you do see the bishop come into something like g4, you should be quite happy, because if you're able to exchange off that bishop, you're going to get a light square domination. And what I mean by that is basically your queen and your bishop will have no opposing threats. So you'll be able to generate some big attacks with these two pieces. Just to speed through this particular game, you've probably all seen this before, but there was this interesting knight sack, and white just got on with his development. Black's passive setup just led to his downfall in this game. And after this nice exchange and the following rook, black tried to untangle himself with queen to e6, but now they're the very famous continuation, the queen sack, and then the mate on d8. A very famous game, but had a very nice conclusion. So, as I say, if you see that bishop move come out very early, if I just go back all the way to here, you should be very happy. Just take on e5 and enjoy a nice position. So we're now back to our mainline position. One other try from black that I think should lead to a good edge for white here is the move knight to c6, and it looks like it makes a lot of sense, this move, in that it attacks this pawn and black is simply threatening this. Now there are a couple moves that are fine here. d5 is probably fine, you get a nice space advantage and enjoy a good edge there, but I think even better is the move bishop to b5. This just has the simple threat of d5 attacking the pinned knight and hopefully trying to win a piece from that. Now here black has done a number of things, but just to show you immediately, if a6 is played, this should already give black a nice edge. D takes here, and you can't take back because of this queen, so already this is you enjoy a very, very nice position here. So instead black has tried to release some of the tension in the centre, but after knight here, which is just re-attacks this pawn, already white is scoring quite well on this line. Bishop to d7, blocking the pin. And what we shouldn't do in this particular position is release all the tension immediately of stuff like this. For example, black doesn't need to take back. He can take here, and okay, you've given him a pawn weakness to go for, but actually black's pawn structure is not terrible here. you know, he's got a tempo on this bishop, so you have to move away, and then black gets a little bit ahead in development and can set up some nice defensive ideas. So instead of releasing this tension, I think better here is just developing your pieces. Just get your pieces out to good squares. If the knight were to capture in the centre, which has happened in quite a lot of games, d takes, queen takes, and now you can enjoy a position with queen takes and d4. You're going to see this queen come out quite a bit in a lot of the lines and some of the main lines, but if you can get this queen onto a good square like this without this knight being on c6, you can already claim an edge here, because this queen is controlling a lot of squares in the centre. It's got a big influence on black's position, so you know you can't do stuff like bishop here because you just take here, for example. And well, it's going to really help your it's going to already give you quite a nice edge here. There's also some practical issues for black. He's got no good way of dealing with this queen in the centre. If you think something like pawn to c5 as a move here, trying to hit this queen with a tempi, then already white can have a very nice position. Queen to d3, just coming back but maintaining its eye contact on d6. Let's say castle's long here, bishop to f4. White's got a very simple plan, just go after that backwards pawn. It's a weakness that's been created by black with that last move. So I think white should do fine against that knight to c6 line, gets the queen out and enjoy a good game. Okay, so let's now go back to some of our more interesting mainline positions here. Now the first one, it's not been played very often on the Lichess database, but what's interesting is it appears quite a bit on the Master Game database, and that is the move knight to, I'm just going to get the right move here, knight to f6. And this is known as the Nimzowitsch variation. I think what puts off a lot of people in this line is they're worried that after this and this, white gets a very good edge after that. But the truth is that black has got another move here. He doesn't actually need to take this pawn. He can just play this instead. And the beauty of this is after this captures back, we have a couple of pleasant options. We can either take back with a knight or just take back with a bishop, getting on with development. And black has scored quite well in this particular line. So instead here, after knight takes to e4, white has a very good move, but it's hard to know this move. And you know, unless you've studied this position, you're not going to know that this is the best move. But here, in order to get an edge for white, in my opinion, is to play the move queen to d5. Very strong move. It's known as the rel stab variation. You're hitting this knight, and there's not really many good squares for this knight to go to. If now it comes to c5, which at the very least holds on to everything, again, a mistake, don't take this, bishop takes is fine. Here you could play bishop to g5 here, and this is immediately putting a bit of pressure on this queen. Obviously we don't want to do stuff like this. This is just going to end in complete disaster after something like this. And if g takes, then there's, you know, you can already claim an edge here after this, because what is this ridiculous isolated pawn doing on that square? Black's king side is just totally shattered, and there's not much that really black can do in this position. So just going back, instead of all of this, black has often then had to play a move like queen to d7, getting the queen away from that threat. Now you can take here on d6, and after bishop takes here, you can just develop your knight onto c6. What's difficult for black in this position, and again, just like in a lot of these lines here, is this queen on d5 has got a lot of influence, and there's not an easy way to just kick it away. You know, normally we're told not to develop our queen very early, but in this line, I think it's fine to do it because there's no good way of kicking it around, and it's controlling a lot of the play in this position, creating some threats that black needs to deal with. Okay, so something like castles here has been played. By the way, if you're interested in c6, this would be fine for white. There's a couple of pleasant moves, but I think d5 is quite nice. Notice now that this bishop has not got an anchored pawn to look after it, so castles long is now a threat here that black needs to deal with very, very quickly. So going back, castles here and then castles long, and I think white just enjoys a good position here. I'll play a few more moves just so you can see some more stuff. There's been this sort of lines played before. And yeah, as I say again, this pawn is always hanging. This is always going to be an issue. Black could actually give up this pawn potentially and try and play on from here. There's been a couple of master games from this position, but white is up a pawn. He's about to finish his development with the bishop maybe coming to e2 maybe, or coming over to b5 to attack this knight and maybe create some more pawn weaknesses. I think white just enjoys a good position against this particular line. Okay, so we've almost reached the main line here. I do want to focus on just one more interesting sideline, and that's the move knight to d7. This is known as the Han-Ham variation, and a lot of maybe black players, particularly club level, amateur level, might play this line because it leads into what's known as the black line defense, which is a very strong system that black can employ here. Against this line, what white must do is play his bishop onto c4. Again, we're now threatening to come with our knight and our bishop and attack this f7 square. If, let's say, knight to g to f6, then this leads to disaster already for black, as now you can take here first, and after d takes, you can now jump into g5, and this is scored really, really well for white because there's no good way for black to deal with this threat. If instead knight takes on e5, once again black scores a nice position after knight takes, pawn takes, capturing this pawn first, which is interesting because if f takes, king takes on f7, you then win the queen. So black has often moved the king first, and then again you can embarrass this position, and this is fine for white. He's up a pawn, he's got a nice solid position, he's going to castle maybe on the next move potentially, or just maybe castle on the long side with stuff like this, and this is a fine setup for white to play against this line. So instead of this, black has actually played the move c6, which aims to deal with knight to g5 by pushing with d5 and blocking off this bishop. Against this, I think white's best option is just to get ahead in development, because by playing this way, he's just going to fall behind in development very quickly and create some problems for black as a result. So here there's been a couple moves that have been played. E takes on d4. You can actually meet with this with queen takes on d4. And unfortunately, once again, there's no good way for black to deal with this queen being on this really active square. It's stopping the bishop from coming to e7 momentarily because you've got this potential issue. And well, if you try maybe queen to f6, which looks to deal with this issue and actually scores quite well for white here, in that it's now attacking this queen. We don't want to take back this queen because this will help black out, and I think black would be very happy with the exchanges. Instead, you want to play the move queen to e3, a very nice move because it's now threatening to push forward this pawn and create some problems for black's centre. Knight to e5 has been played the most, but here you can take after queen takes. You can now, there's a number of pleasant options here, but f4 I think is interesting because you are now pushing forward. Queen to c5 has been played, and I don't think there's any super rush to take, but I think taking here is probably fine because now you've got a weakness to go after. You've got a good control of the centre. Black is still far away from castling. You're going to finish your development with knight to c3 here, and I think this line should score well for the white side as a result. So instead here, bishop to e7 has been played to just get on with development and then look to castle pretty quickly. But against this, you can now play d takes an e5, and after d takes an e5, you can actually still play knight to g5 now. The reason why this works is because if the bishop were to take, which is the best line here, you can now play queen to h5, which is not only threatening the bishop, but also threatening mate on f7. Well, black has really only got one good way of dealing with this threat, and that's playing queen to e7, which looks to shore everything up. But now white has a pleasant position after exchanging queens. Oops, not that move. Queen takes here, which is actually threatening this, so he has to take back. And after moves like this, white enjoys a nice position. I think he's got the bishop pair, he's got a nice solid looking centre. Black is not threatening anything anytime soon, and actually you can really shut down most of black's counterplay with a4 now. There's not really anything pleasant for black to do on that side. And I think white should just enjoy a nice position here. I think this is much easier for white to play. You know, put your rooks onto open files, this sort of stuff. And I think white is doing very well here. I think it's it's easier for white to have a plan here than it is for black. And you know, if this knight were to ever move as well, you can always start swapping this off and create a weakness for black to play with. And well, I'll just be honest with you, I just don't really enjoy this position for the black side whatsoever. So as you can see here, you can be extremely disruptive against this particular line by playing bishop to c4, followed by potentially moving the knight to g5. Right, let's finally have a look at the main line. We've avoided this for a long time, but the best move here that's been played the most in the Lichess database and also the Master Game database is e takes on d4. Getting rid of some of the tension. The problem is, by releasing this tension, it doesn't really solve this issue with this bishop whatsoever. And white has a couple of pleasant options here, but the move I'm going to be recommending is the second most popular move, queen to d takes on d4. And you might be thinking to yourself immediately that this move can't be any good because it just allows black to play knight to c6. The problem here for black is that although this is now attacking this queen doesn't actually need to move anywhere. Instead, you can now play the move bishop to b5, which pins this knight. If bishop comes here, you take off this knight, you exchange this off, but actually you just get really far ahead in development now, and you're going to have a very, in my view, a very active position, a very pleasant position to play with the white side. So just to show you a few more moves, if let's say black just makes normal developing looking moves, stuff like this, getting ready to castle here, for example. Here, instead of castling short, I think castling long is much stronger. And once again, as I say, I think white has got a very pleasant position here. He's got all his pieces developed. After castles, you just get your rook onto this nice semi-open file, and you're going to essentially create some issues for black to deal with. So there's been a number of different moves that black has played from this particular position. Either h6 has been played quite a lot, or knight to d7, but both of these will tend to lead the same way. The idea of knight to d7 is that white, because he's got less space, is trying to force off quite a lot of exchanges here. But you're going to see that actually this doesn't really help black in any way. After you capture this bishop, what our plan here for the white side at this particular position is to play the move queen to d2, followed by the knight coming to d4. This seems to be the best option for white here, because by getting this knight onto d4, you're then attacking this bishop and threatening to create a double pawn, which gives you a weakness to go after in this particular position. So just to show you that, I'm going to now follow a game, and albeit it is a bullet game, this was a game, but it was a bullet game played on Lichess, but the two players are very, very strong. The first one is, I think it's Sergei Zygalko, who I think is like 2700 in real life, but on Lichess He's 3098, so he's one of the strongest players on Lichess. And he played this bullet game against another 3000 rated player on Lichess. So he put his queen back to d2. Black just tried to kind of wait a little bit to see what white was going to do here. Here, knight was able to play to d4. He now got his rook onto here to put a bit of pressure on this pawn. And f4 was then handily played. So this is some other ideas that you've got in this line of playing this way. By moving the knight as well, you've also opened up the potential to play f4 here, which will give you a nice pawn lever to try and break open black's passive looking position. In the game, knight played to c5, but this now allowed the pawn to come forward, breaking in the centre. There was a couple of exchanges now that happened, but at the end of all of this, white had a very pleasant position. He's forced a pawn weakness in black's position, and I think just had a very pleasant game from here. He's got this nice passer that potentially could become a queen, so black had to deal with that for now. And here there was a very nice exchange. He actually got rid of the double pawns for black, but then in the process activated his knight onto a very active square. And well, in this position, black now just dropped a pawn now. And here there was an exchange of knights, but white had a very pleasant position. He's up a pawn, he got into this rook ending, and well, what ended up happening was that Sergei actually blundered away the win and got into a drawn position, but he was able to then still win it on the white side. So just to show you what happened the next few moves, this sort of stuff happened. And he ended up blundering away his advantage. But I think this is a very nice position that you would want to aim for here. You're up a clear pawn, you've got your rook to a really good square, and you've got this very nice pass pawn to play with, which should give white a bit of an edge. So just from that particular mainline position, if I just go back all the way to over here, you should score particularly well. You've got a very active position. Your plan is to do this sort of stuff and then maybe play f4 to try and break in the center to have create a passer for your pawn to maybe create some pressure in the ending. So there we have it, an interesting way to deal with the Philidor defense. Play d4. If you ever see this exchange then occur, you can enjoy a very nice position with queen takes on d4, and a lot of different lines of this queen coming out early to create some early pressure on black's position. Hope you found these videos instructive. I hope this was helped you in your next game against the Philidor defense if you know your opponent plays it. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.